Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here at the Imagine More conference. Thank you, Jan, for asking me. And being able to share with you my son Brody's story and our journey of getting off the fence and the steps we've taken toward making the good life happen and some of the lessons that we've learnt along the way. This is my eldest son, Brody, with his 3 younger siblings. Brody is 24 years old and currently lives with us at home, although not for much longer, he assures me. He is a student at TAFE, studying a Certificate 4 in Hospitality. He's an employee working at 4 major Melbourne event stadiums in 2 different jobs. Brody's a church member and a church volunteer team member. He's a neighbour and a well-regarded friend, a gym member, an international traveller, a musician and a conference presenter. Yet only 2.5 years ago, Brody's life was vastly different to today. Brody's only major role was client at a day program, 5 days a week, and with nearly all of his recreation coming from disability services as well. We were seeing escalating behavioural, emotional, psychological, and even physical issues coming from Brody inhabiting devalued roles with other devalued and vulnerable people. Where Brody had even small scope for choice, he showed attraction to even further devalued roles, such as at-risk youth group member and crime victim. Life seemed to be an exhausting round of reacting to whatever came next. I should mention that my 2 youngest sons were also diagnosed with high-functioning autism. So it was quite a complex family situation as well. I had been learning, however, about inclusion and how other families and people had developed a good life. I had become part of a family governmental group, living distinctive lives, and had begun the process of starting a circle. Yet there just didn't seem the energy required to do any of the things that might make a long-range difference. I felt frustrated at what seemed like my procrastination and inability to just get things done. Looking back now, I see that it was very necessary for me to take the time to accumulate and assimilate all of that wisdom of others through attending things like this. Everything I was learning, conferences and workshops, books and conversations, were all percolating under the surface and doing the invisible work of shifting my mindset and beliefs and reprioritising and sharpening my values and slowly but surely building the motivation and means to choose another way. When we've been indoctrinated in a system solution way of thinking, that is, that there are paid experts and services who can provide us, the person and the family, the answer, it can take some time to shift perspective. And I found that for both Brody and I, there was quite a degree of internal resistance that required working through, even though we were both wanting better things. An example of this was the resistance that arose toward getting Brody's circle up and running. I'd asked all of the members and everyone had enthusiastically agreed, yet it took 12 months for me to organise that first dinner and meeting. That's 12 months, not 12 weeks. Which was really me clearing the belief that it was all up to me and letting others in to love and to care and to be a part of Brody's life. Thankfully, everyone remained really interested and keen, and the circle has gone on to become an important foundation in Brody's life. At this point, though, We were hitting the bottom, that place where change becomes necessary and definite choices must be made and actions taken. It was time for me to get very real about the consequences of not taking action. It was someone's life being put on hold, my son's life. I remember attending a leadership workshop with Michael Kendrick and being challenged to get off the fence, to step up to the leadership role that life was asking of me. This was a real catalyst for change because I hadn't realised that we actually were on the fence. I was wanting the good things of life for Brodie within community just like everybody else, yet what he was actually doing was segregation, meaningless time wasting. I was hedging bets and still believing that someone or some service could do it all for us. Somewhere along the line, you have to start doing what actually works and stop doing what doesn't. I used the surge of motivation that came from this insight and took immediate action, giving notice to the day service and applying for Brodie's funding to be self-directed. These were two very important steps because now Brodie had time and space to start pursuing what was aligned with his vision. And by self-directing, we had the flexibility and autonomy to decide how best to support him. This wasn't without resistance from the system. And I was warned I was being foolhardy if I set up our own paid employment role. What if something went wrong? Thankfully, all such advice was ignored. And here's Brodie on his first day of paid work as a lawn and garden maintenance worker. This is Andy, his first boss, a dad at our local primary school. It's always hard to know where to start, but we have found that starting local with our own community and taking a small step in the direction of what Brodie's interested in this case, machinery, and wanting to get paid, that was a big interest, was a good place to begin. This was a great first step for Brodie. He started learning the ropes of what it is to work, and we began learning how best to support him. And yes, some things did go wrong. I think at one point a lawnmower just got saved from going on the road. But many more went right. And we found that nothing is wasted. By responding to the feedback of what was working and what was not working, and adjusting course all the time, really all the mistakes have become growth opportunities. It's remarkable to note that 3 months prior to this photo being taken, Brodie and I were informed by the experts that he was a long way from being work ready. That's despite 4 years in ready to work programs. Just like everyone else, Brodie has become work ready through actually working. One important lesson that we've both had to learn is the value in letting everyone get the full benefit of any teaching moment. This meant me learning to step back as an interface and encouraging and supporting the natural teacher in the situation, in this case Brodie's boss, to give honest and timely feedback so that Brodie could be motivated himself to make adjustments. And this was hard for me because I had to loosen my need to protect and rescue Brodie. As well, because it was close to his only valued role, I was absolutely terrified of him losing it. But many roles do come to a natural end. And I've found it best to try your best to accept this and finish as positively and cleanly as possible. As Brodie has gone on with further employment roles, I find it useful to remind myself, well, whose job actually is this? It can be easy when we care and really want someone to succeed to get a bit bound up and start experiencing their success and failure as our success and failure. I've found it very helpful in this regard to have my own mentors and to hold myself accountable. And for me, this has been a very dear and skilled friend who was also able to wear the hat of family coordinator. We met regularly, especially through the initial setting up phase, and I still see her now to help keep me on track and focused to the vision and Brodie's goals and what obstacles I might be finding. The real value is in having someone caring and trusted enough that you invite them to challenge you, while not just noticing any defensiveness that arises within. So this doesn't need to be a paid person at all. In those initial stages of transition and setting up self-direction, there was a lot to do and a lot of energy required to keep the momentum going. Teresa helped me stay grounded and focused on just the one small step in front of me. She would ask, "So what's just one thing you'll do by the next time we meet?" And I found that very easy to commit to, just one small thing. I've found it useful to recognise that there are natural cycles of activity that everyone goes through. And this is including a stage of visioning and imagining, a stage of expending energy and doing, and a stage of rest and recovery. And the more I cooperate and respect these cycles, the greater harmony I experience. The difficulty lies in staying too long in any one stage. A good example of this was recently in the summer holidays. Brodie was definitely in rest and recovery mode. He'd finished a huge year of activity, studying electronic music production at TAFE and starting a regular part-time job, working in the cafe and bar at Rod Laver Arena and Etihad Stadium. With his TAFE course finished, Brodie needed to breathe out and consider his next step. It took a bit of biting my tongue to give him the space he required to come to his own decision. I think I feared that he was going to be sleeping until 2 o'clock every day for the rest of his life. But boy, it's really been worth it. Because when Brodie finally decided to re-enroll as a student again, this time studying hospitality and at a different TAFE, it was with the full commitment of his heart and his head, so that he's taking ownership of this current step in a whole new way. So here's a small clip of Brodie at TAFE last year in the role of music student.
I used to go to 2-day programs, but I like Fox Hill more because I learn about my passion and also I like the people.
He's pretty friendly and he's just fun to be around.
He's always positive, he's always happy, he's always up for a good time, and he's in for the music. That's it.
Happy days are here again. The time is right for making friends.
I love when the other fellow students are talking and they're just perplexed, like, well, he's just here for the music, like, what's the big deal? I love that. And I really got a lot out of the talk this morning on relationships, and I think this is something we really need to pay a little bit more attention and be a bit more intentional about. This film clip was made as part of a joint project with Belonging Matters and Melbourne University called 19 Stories of Inclusion, and I'd like to thank them both for allowing me to use this footage. And if you'd like to see the full version of The Music Student, you can Google 19 Stories of Inclusion or visit the Belonging Matters website. It's through inhabiting the role of student that Brodie is now embracing his certificate for studies. Success builds success, just as from little roles, big roles grow, as John Armstrong says. Just recently, Brodie's class, this is the hospitality class, were practicing barista skills when the teacher called the class over to enthuse over Brodie's range of macchiato, long black, cappuccino, etc. and in particular his skill milk frothing. It was called to attention as the perfect example of what all of the students should be aiming for. It was such a great moment, and the achievement all the more poignant when we were remembering that when Brody first started making coffee, which was just a very short stint volunteering work experience at a local cafe just for 6 weeks, he had such high anxiety that he couldn't use the steamer, and his hands would tremor so badly that he couldn't carry the cup to the table. And I remember them clearly having a conversation with us like, this coffee thing, I just don't know that it's going to work out. But since then, Brody has really been diligent and practiced making coffee at work, volunteering at charity gigs, work experience, volunteering at his church cafe, visiting cafes and watching really skilled baristas, and being guided and encouraged by his barista trainer. Brody still has a little difficulty carrying plates and drinks to tables, but his barista trainer says, don't worry about it. Nearly every barista, just get someone else to do it. In Melbourne, if you make great coffee, you're the man or the woman. It's a valued role indeed. Here's Brody with his team working at the cafe at Rod Laver Arena at the Australian Open this year. He was working 8-hour days, and that was a real stretch. I just want to call your attention to notice how his uniform and his lanyard communicate his employee role. And just notice the body language between the crew. And can you guess who his paid support is? For your interest, it's the guy on the far left, Andre, who had over 10 years barista experience prior to taking up disability studies. Andre's actually employed, dual employed, so we employ him and that's his first priority, but he's actually employed by Brody's workplace as a team leader and specifically to develop all the staff in coffee making. So it's seamless. Brody's not standing out. Well, at the same time, Andre models to the other staff how best to support Brody. So Brody undertakes shifts now with natural support. It's a win-win for all. The other thing that's a benefit to this is that my guy gets financially recompensed very well, and it's reflective of his really amazing skills, both as a barista and as a support worker. While Andre provides paid support, we utilise natural support wherever possible, and we've found it exists everywhere. At a recent staff party, Andre hardly saw Brody. He was out there on the dance floor with his workmates, and so Andre went home at 11 o'clock. Brody continued out with his workmates to karaoke bars and clubbing all over town till 2 or 3 in the morning, safely coming home in a taxi. I have strong faith in Brody's capabilities, in his support team's good sense and intuition, and in the capabilities of good people everywhere. I see Brody's true resources as actually reside within himself and his relationships within community, not his funding package. And this might sound counterintuitive, but we actually aspire to be free of funding. If you think about it, a funding package is not something most people typically are after. We definitely make good use of what Brody has, but while nurturing the skills of thinking creatively and strengthening our community to support Brody. Recently, Brody began seeking out his own community sweet spots, developing relationships and valued roles just out of his own volition and drawn through his own interests. He became a member of the local church, and this was through getting to know a neighbour's older son, same age. Actually, Brody mistook him and thought he knew him, and they ended up with this great friendship. There's lots of singing at this church, which Brodie loves, and a very active young adults group. Over summer, he travelled to South Australia for the annual church camp, undertaking the 10-hour round bus trip and 3 days tenting with freely given support of friends. In the past, I would have managed this somehow, or I would have said micromanaged, but he arranged everything himself, and I dropped him off without having met anyone. That's unheard of in our family. That was a huge step. Recently, the church leadership group invited Brodie to become a team member, taking turns volunteering at the church cafe. Here he is. Now we see skills that Brodie has developed working in the cafe are providing the context for extending his learning at TAFE, and his student role strengthens his capacity at work and now at church as a team member. This is creating positive feedback loops, building capacity, increasing self-esteem, and networks of relationships. This is sustainable practice because everyone is gaining. Now Brodie's life is really beginning to flourish. He's typically out for dinner with mates more often than home, or going out to music gigs of some eclectic Japanese punk bands that mum and dad have never heard of. And Brodie's in a very good position with skills and experience to gain permanent full-time work in the future and be able to financially support himself living out of home. What once was only imagined is now happening. For me, it's more of a matter of just trying to keep up with what Brodie himself initiates. And more he's taking over the reins of his own life. And I'm letting go control and my role. And a big part of letting this happen gracefully is having my own life to live, my own interests and passions and valued roles, my own circle of supportive friends, and a sense of my own life's purpose. And this wasn't always the case, but you can't do for others what you can't or won't do for yourself. It's wonderful when we can come together and learn and be inspired by fellow members of this amazing community to imagine a life more. So I invite you to take whatever may have sparked inside you and enter a short exercise. Just quietly within yourself, reflecting on this question. When I think about getting off the fence, what comes up is, you might like to just jot this down or just noting it in your mind. When I think about getting off the fence, what comes up is. When I think about getting off the fence, what I feel is. Just the emotion that arises. It might even be a sensation in your body. And what I really want or need to get off the fence is. And I invite you to go a little deeper. Ask why. And how do you really feel? And what is it that you really want or need? Going beyond the fear. What is it you really want or need? And perhaps you might like to just pause and take the time to imagine more. Visualize actually having what you really want or need. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And what is one small step in front of you that you will do when you leave this conference? Is there any obstacle in the way? It might just be in your mind. How might you resolve this? And finally, what's your commitment? What will you give this? Finally, I would like to acknowledge and thank Brodie for his willingness and generosity in allowing his story to be shared. He's actually going to a conference in a couple of weeks to share his story by himself. Well, with support, but not me. I find his courage to give things a go and his absolutely rock-solid belief that he can do anything just like everybody else truly inspiring. And to be honest, most of the reason for his success, if not all. Both Brodie and I sincerely wish you the best in your efforts toward this life-affirming and meaningful work, and may all that you dare to imagine come true. Thank you.